from sagas to other stories. And there is something about a great story that stays with you long after the last page is turned. The works of celebrated American author Mark Twain certainly qualify. In his day, Twain was one of the most famous people on the planet. His books were in almost every English-speaking home. What's not generally appreciated, though, is that Twain spent time in Adelaide. Now, 100 years after his death, the State Library and Twain fans have been re-examining what the author made of us. For some reason, the fair city of Adelaide has attracted some very unfair literary barbs.
Something like Adelaide's a very good town for murder. I mean, there's this whole string of those sorts of things from often disgruntled writers at Writers' Week. They try and make themselves sound oh so cosmopolitan by comparing themselves to what they call a provincial town.
Bill Bryson, when he came to Adelaide, he said, look, it's a very nice place, but my memory is, he said, there's just not much to do. And it is a bit of a put down.
But more than a century ago, this city caught the eye of a true literary superstar, someone so bright that he shades the merely famous who turn up these days.
This is well before cinema, radio, well before television. And so there were no film stars, there were no radio stars. And so he was an international star.
That author was the celebrated American humorist, novelist and journalist Mark Twain. Now, 100 years after Twain's death, the second volume of his autobiography is about to be published. And that, as a Twain character might have said, has got folks to a wonder and why the great author came here and what he thought.
He loved it. He thought it was a very handsome city. I think he had no preconceptions of it before he came.
And what he found fascinating about the provinces at the time of Australia was the people who lived there, not only the Europeans who had settled there, but also the native peoples. Mark Twain, by the 1890s, in this case the mid-1890s, was becoming more and more politically engaged, not only at home, but eventually around the world.
I like the fact that we're living in a city where Mark Twain walked our streets and he looked at our botanic gardens and he went down to our proclamation ceremony down at Glenelg.
For Mark Twain, puffery and myth were fair game, so he'd be pleased, no doubt, that the State Library has overturned one about the man himself. As he pored over the records of the visit, Alan Smith uncovered a Twain tall tale. It's always been assumed that the author addressed his adoring masses here in the Institute building. So he didn't speak here?
No, he didn't speak here, which is more the pity. As you can see, a beautiful room for something like that to have happened in.
The lectures were held at Glenelg and the Town Hall. Twain made jokes about the number of old people in his Adelaide audiences. Some things never change. He criticised white Australians for their treatment of Indigenous people. And apparently Mark Twain wasn't that taken with Melbourne.
Well, that's only to his credit again.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying about that good old way.
Mark Twain grew up on the banks of the Mississippi River, but he came to loathe slavery and he was an ardent abolitionist. His real name was Samuel Clements. The name Mark Twain comes from his career as a riverboat pilot.
To test the depth of the water, they would drop a lead line, literally a piece of lead on the end of a rope with different ties on it. And one of the marks was called Mark Twain, which was 12 feet of water, which was the dividing line between safe and dangerous waters. So Mark Twain would live up to that name throughout the rest of his life, through his writing, his lecturing, his business acumen, or lack thereof.
It was that lack of business acumen that, no pun intended, led him to Adelaide. Jeff Nichols runs Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. This marvellous Victorian pile was the author's pride and joy, but he had to leave it. Twain refused a chance to invest in the telephone, thinking it would never catch on. Instead, he put his money into this typesetting machine.
Had several flaws. One, it was not reliable. It would break down constantly. And second was the inventor himself. James Page was a tinker. He wanted to keep going back and making changes and making it perfect. And he never got there. He was also very good at spending money. And he spent over $200,000 of Mark Twain's money on this machine.
To get himself out of debt, Twain set off on a world lecture tour that was to include Adelaide. His travels became yet another book, Following the Equator. Twain is still admired today for his stories around the world, and ABC local radio's David Bevan is a fan. A visit to the Twain house in Connecticut is on his bucket list, things to do before he expires. But it's Twain's relevance to daily life that really matters to him.
I have a quote of Mark Twain sitting next to my desk. Twain, before he was an internationally known writer, he was a reporter, and he said that ours is a useful trade, a worthy calling. For all of its lightness and frivolity, it has one serious purpose, one aim, one specialty, and it is constant to it. And that is the deriding of shams and the exposure of pretentious falsities.
And that is the secret. A good story, well told, never goes out of style.
Whether he was writing about the plight of the serfs in Russia under the Tsar system, or even in Australia, and the native population there, or African Americans in the United States, he had a way of being able to tell these stories and engage people. And I think that's what his legacy is today.
One, I guess you could say, for the Twain Twagics.